So I guess
Hello.
we're back.
Back on after a break.
I I know I have to stop sharing my screen so everyone can see just Rick and me because it's been so long. I don't know, I'm out of tune. I'm out of touch. I don't know what I'm doing. But I do remember my name, and it's Ann Merchant, and I work for the National Academy of Sciences. And of course, as always, I am joined by.
I'm Rick Lovert. I also work for the National Academy of Sciences. I am the program director of the Science and Entertainment Exchange.
And we are so glad that you are back. We were really happy with when the RSVPs came flying in. So it means that you're back with us for 2021. So I guess it's a couple of weeks into the new year, but we will still say Happy New Year because I think that we all need a little happiness in our new year. So we're very happy that you're here. And of course, the other thing I always remember how to do is to explain a little bit about what the National Academy of Sciences is and what we do. So we are a private nonprofit institution located in Washington, D.C., of course, but that's not where I am. This is not my office at the Academy. I remain at home in my little corner of my house. And so the Academy it continues to be very busy. I think that most of us got a little bit of time off at the end of the year, but we are back at it because this has been an extraordinarily busy time for the institution. And one of the reports that I have referenced before, it is the framework report for the distribution of COVID vaccines. And of course, Reed Tuckson, who is here with us today, was on that committee. And that's a little bit, of course, about what we're going to reference in today's event, but it's that sort of work that the institution has been doing. And so we're very, very happy when we can we have 3 National Academy of Medicine members here with us today, because part of the National Academies, it's the National Academy of Sciences, the National Academy of Engineering, and the National Academy of Medicine. And to be a member of one of those honorific societies, it's a pretty big deal. So it's a pretty big deal for us when we can get 3 of those members. But to communicate our work, and a lot of our reports, of course, do that job to communicate the work of the institution, we like to reach broader audiences. And so it's programs like the Science and Entertainment Exchange that help the institution do that. And so, Rick, as you said, you are the director of the Science and Entertainment Exchange. And so I'm assuming that you still remember how to explain your program.
Let's hope. Let's hope. Well, before I do that, though, I want to say thank you to everyone in our audience who took our poll at the end of the year. You gave us a lot of terrific ideas and a lot of great feedback. And we are going to be implementing a bunch of the requests that came up again for events subjects. So stay tuned for that. There are events in the pipeline now that come directly from your feedback. So thank you. So Science and Entertainment Exchange. If you are a writer, producer, director, studio executive, storyteller in any format, and you have a question about science as you are creating a storyline, you can call us at 844-NEED-SCI, and we will connect you, or you can email us, and we will connect you with a field expert who can hopefully answer questions and contextualize them. We've done over 3,200 consults since we opened our doors over 10 years ago. Fairly recently, movies like Avengers Infinity War, Man of Steel, Black Panther, Captain Marvel, and even Songbird, the more recent release. So if you are a STEM professional and you are interested in volunteering for one of our consults, please do contact us. We're always looking for more people in more subject areas, so we're very interested to connect with you. I want to thank Meche for doing our AV today and making sure the trains run on time. Thank you. Speaking of making sure the trains run on time, Jeff Fishman, also Courtney Sloan and Sachi Gerben with me in Los Angeles who helps do the consults and makes the program run on time. Thank you, guys. I also have to thank our sponsors, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, without whom this event today would not be happening. Also the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Walt Disney Company, Film Nation, Google, Lyda Hill Foundation, Corteva, and many individual donors like yourselves. We had a much stronger response to our end of year giving letter that we sent out. So thank you everybody who donated. Thank you also for everybody who donated to this event. We are so excited to have your support. And if you were able to join, and I know not everybody is, and we appreciate all donations and all support, but if you were able to join at that $100 level, we are going to send you one of these coins that hopefully my green screen isn't taking away from me. And you will also get unique access to things like VIP Q&A and also some events that are just for supporters. So today, this event, you are going to hear from some incredible speakers, as Anne said at the beginning, 3 members of the National Academy of Medicine. We are so excited to get started and to have you hear from them. If at any point, including a couple of you have already asked, at the bottom of your screen down here, if you're on a computer, I'm told if you're on an iPad, it's actually on the top of your screen.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It was actually my mother who corrected me. But there should be a little button that says Q&A. You can click that at any time, and we're going to be curating that, and we will get to as many questions as we possibly can. We almost always have way more questions by like a factor of 10 than we're even able to get to. But if we can, we're going to get to as many as we possibly can in the Q&A. So please do ask your questions down there or up there, and we'll get to as many as we can. I think that's it for right now. Back to you, Anne.
I think that's about it. Although we're going to continue our tradition of just pointing you in the direction of something that we think is interesting, something that we found interesting. So my colleague, Bill Carney, who is the head of our Office of News and Public Information, this last week did an interview with Janet Napolitano. And so, of course, many of you may recognize that name because she was the Secretary of Homeland Security. And before that, she was a 2-term governor of the state of Arizona. And she's the president of the University of California system. And the interview is very interesting. It's part of the Issues in Science and Technology magazine. So that's part of the Academy. So you should take a look at that. And Sachi has shared the link. It was very interesting. She talks a lot about the pandemic and how that has impacted a system like the University of California and public universities in particular. But, she also gave her perspective on cybersecurity and domestic terrorism, which, this interview was conducted right before the massive cybersecurity attack, right before the Nashville bombing, and right before the assault on the US Capitol. So it's an especially prescient interview and was one that I found really interesting and very, I learned a lot from it. So I highly recommend it.
And I wanted to recommend, I've been reading a book that has nothing to do with anything I normally work on, but it's called Money, The True Story of a Made Up Thing. And it's by Jacob Goldstein, who hosts a podcast called Planet Money. And I have very much, this is not a topic that I have a great understanding of or interest in, but normally, economics, the dismal science and all that. But this book is actually really interesting, has a lot of great stories in it. So I'm recommending it.
Those were our 2 recommendations. And so the other thing we recommend is that now you stick around because we've got the main event. And so we're going to ask Howard Markel to join us on screen. Howard is our moderator today, but he too is he's not just any moderator. He also is a member of the National Academy of Medicine, is a science medicine historian, and as a professor at the University of Michigan. And we couldn't think of a better person to give us that sort of contextual perspective on our topic today. And I think, Rick, it was you who came up with the title Gray Matters, because there's so much that doesn't feel black and white in this conversation about vaccines. I talked about the fact that the Academies has done this framework report, but coming up with a framework for the distribution of vaccines is just the very first step. That the challenge in distributing vaccines to a country of our size is significant, and particularly because we have a history. There's a long history of challenging communications issues, a long history of how vaccines have been discussed. And so we are very, very happy that Howard is going to moderate the conversation with Ruth Faden and with Reed Tuckson. And we're going to turn it over to you, Howard, to take it away and to get us into our event. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Howard.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anne and Rick and everyone at the National Academy of Sciences. We're so delighted to be here and to speak with you. When I got into studying epidemics, it was because I was a frustrated playwright and screenwriter. I wrote terrible plots, but the great thing about an epidemic or pandemic is that had narratives. They had beginnings, middles, and ends, and they had all sorts of social and political contexts, as well as scientific ones and dramatic stories of life and death. And also, if you like the terrific, the traditionally grotesque infectious diseases, there's quite a few that we could discuss later on that would make probably a 14-year-old feel very good about him or herself at that moment. And so it's interesting that this again is of great interest to documentarists, to journalists, to fiction writers, to screenwriters, and so on. The drama of the social laboratory of an epidemic or a pandemic. And today, this pandemic, of course, it's the pandemic of our lifetimes in terms of any measures you want to use, death toll, number of cases in intensive care, and so on. And, we produce more COVID infection right now than any other place in the world. So that's been a real serious challenge to our lives. And we've been putting ourselves on hold, most of us who have been able to work remotely, to prevent as many opportunities to contract the COVID virus. And now more recently, we've heard that there's not one, not two, but actually three vaccines around the world that have been tested and proven. They're all mRNA vaccines, but the problem is they have not been produced in the millions of doses, let alone the hundreds and hundreds of millions that we need in the United States and many other countries. We'll talk about who will get and who will not get in a minute here in a little bit. But particularly when we haven't made hundreds of millions, there's going to be issues of equity, issue of cronyism, and issues of, misused vaccine, because a lot of these vaccines, particularly the Pfizer one, has to be kept at a, South Pole type climate of freezing. Well, that requires a special freezer. And if that's broken, that freezer security is broken, the vaccine is no longer very good. But the good news is that in 12 months from the time that we have first seen a newly emergent coronavirus to the point where we have vaccine, 12 months later, that's a world record in the history of medicine. And in fact, we ought to be cheering and having a parade for the various three companies that were involved. It's harder to do that cheering now because we don't have a singular Jonas Salk character who could become the source of all of our admiration back in 1955 when his vaccine for polio was tested after a year-long test of 1.8 million children and shown to be safe, potent, and effective. That was different because while polio epidemics came almost every summer, and there was a pretty bad one in 1954, by the way, about 50 or 60,000 children got polio that summer. And while it was very dramatic because it was children, it didn't involve the hundreds of thousands, let alone the millions of people that we're seeing with COVID or what we saw with the 1918 flu. And it's very dramatic because it was generally children who were infected, but not exclusively, as we see, for example, in FDR. But there was a lot of drama to it and people were worried about it. But we weren't in the middle of the war per se. We were in the middle of the worst polio storm in history. And so that working in the middle of the war is an issue that really is something we need to think about. We're going to get to equity issues and who has access to the vaccine. We're going to talk about asking Americans to place their trust in a brand new technology, something that requires very clear communication, very effective communication between our public health officials at the local, state, and federal level, and the public at large, as well as doctors and scientists who will have to go out in the community and answer questions about these new technologies. As a pediatrician, that was most of my work in the clinic, was talking to parents about medical procedures, and many of them happen to be immunizations, as a matter of fact. So we haven't always gotten the messaging right, and both of our panelists will be very well qualified to talk about this. You know, is something ordained, preordained because it happened in the past to happen in the same way in the future? Probably not. History doesn't move in exact cycles like that, but there are things that we can learn from the past. And when we talk, one thing we can talk about is the 1955 polio vaccine, for example, which there were 6 companies that were making it. And in the first weeks of its being official, one company botched a batch, and 40 or 50,000 mild cases of polio, 250 people who were paralyzed, about 10 people who were killed because of those bad doses of Cutter polio vaccine. And the Surgeon General got involved. They cleaned up everything, and then they came back stronger than ever. If a mistake like that happened with the COVID vaccine, it would shut things down instantly. But parents had a different faith and trust in science and their doctors. And particularly for polio vaccine, we're pushing their kids to the head of the line, as well as themselves, to get this wonderful vaccine. The communications that we have with this one are going to be a lot trickier, and we're going to need all the help we can get. And we have some wonderful help today. We have Ruth Fadin, who is a founding director of the Johns Hopkins Berman Institute of Bioethics. And she was my professor of bioethics when we were both teenagers, so that was a long time ago. Much of her work focuses on structural injustice at the intersection of theory and the real world, and she currently spends her time on structural injustice and the COVID pandemic, particularly on vaccine policy and K through 12 education. And then our second guest today is Reed Tuckson, MD, a very distinguished former commissioner of public health for Washington, D.C. He was also vice president for professional standards of the AMA and former executive vice president for health affairs at the United Health Group. And his work currently involves co-founding the Black Coalition Against COVID. It's a multidisciplinary collaborative of the leading Black health academic and medical organizations in the United States. So let's first go with Professor Fadin and talk a little bit about the equity or lack thereof in these vaccines as they're being rolled out in the United States.
My pleasure. Thanks, Howard. And I'm delighted to be here. I actually thought I was going to come after Reed, but I am fine coming.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Coming before Reed. So I'm thinking maybe it doesn't matter. Reed, would it
make sense? We can do that. I
don't know. I think it might, but Reed,
let's do that. We have the ability to do that. Reed, can I find you there in the ethos?
Yeah.
No, thank you. All right. Well, listen, thank you both.
Sorry,
Howard,
I apologize to both of you. I didn't.
It's
had your
okay.
name in front.
No
Thanks to both of you, Howard, and to my good friend Ruth. I'll make a few comments very quickly and hopefully open up a couple of doors of interest. This pandemic, if it has done anything, has shown a bright light on the relationships between individuals and the larger society in which they live. There are extraordinarily powerful human narratives with strong emotional drama that are being played out in front of us, whether it is the indelible pictures of our heroic health workers who are risking life every day that they go to work, whether it is these dramas that seem to indicate that some people feel that they have a right not to wear a mask because of some sort of pronouncement about their own personal identity and their own personal sense of who they are, despite a strong likelihood that they could infect, sicken, or kill an innocent, vulnerable person who happens to come into their vicinity. These are all proxies for, in many ways, power dynamics. You can't tell me what to do, those kinds of dynamics. It is also especially significant for the relationships that we have with our essential workers out in the world, people who are poor generally, lower on the socioeconomic status, who are in our grocery stores and retail, the people that are cleaning our streets, all of whom are suffering from the power dynamic of